There probably isn't a parent who hasn't at one time or another wished that their children could be knocked into shape by a drill sergeant. A few weeks in the Army, you may have said, that would teach those kids a thing or two. Well, there's one school which operates on exactly that philosophy. It's in Southern Ontario and is Canada's only private military school. It was founded to help boys who couldn't seem to learn in the large classes and academic freedom of most schools today.
The boys of Robert Land, who range from 10 to 17 years of age, have been marching to a special beat since 1978.
We are in the middle of Operation Inspiration, Bob.
That was when Scott Bowman, then himself only 26 years old, saw the need for a school which provided a combination of strict discipline, a fundamental curriculum, and a strong emphasis on moral values that couldn't be found elsewhere.
Hello, it's Peter Merrick, and I'm so excited. We have lost the art of storytelling, and what I mean by that is stories with morals. Today, we're going to be speaking with Scott Bowman. We're going to be speaking with Scott and talking about the lost art of story, especially ones that actually get young people to see a better future, one where we care about our society and we contribute. And also, we are proud to be members of that society. Now, it is said in Proverbs, those who have no vision will perish. And right now, we are a society that has no compass. And the Greeks used to compare human beings to ships. And right now, the majority of people out there are ships without rudders. And these moral stories told through the generations have given millions and billions of people their rudder. Scott, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Peter, it's a pleasure to be with you over the 3,000 miles that separate us. Good to see you again. I would just like to offer, if I can, to coattail on what you said.
Please.
The great value of stories, particularly with our young people, is that they can be such an effective venue to bring to light, to put on the table, difficult, complex, sensitive, even hurtful issues that parents, teachers, clergy, leaders of all kinds can use. And in my youth, these were much more prevalent than they are today. We heard them in school, we heard them from coaches, we heard them from clergy, we heard them from parents, we heard them from grandparents. Stories still had a life. I don't know why, perhaps the electronic media, perhaps TV, perhaps all kinds of reasons, we seem to have drifted away from them. And in so doing, their romance, their intrigue, the fact that they can excite our imagination seems to have gone somewhere with them, and kind of sad. I use these stories, as you know, after breakfast, many mornings at school. And I would just read a story, and then we would discuss. And boys, from the youngest boys to the oldest, would have opinions and stand and speak to them in front of the whole school. And it was a wonderful, wonderful venue. It was very, very rich, Peter, because boys got up and spoke their hearts.
Scott, you have a story right now, something that is so powerful that we can use today, and it's of the two wolves. And if you could share with us a little about this story by reading it, and maybe we can discuss it a little.
Absolutely. It's called The Two Wolves. It's a native Cherokee legend. A Cherokee grandfather listened to his grandson, who came to him filled with anger at a schoolmate who had done him an injustice. He explained to his grandson, "Let me tell you a story. I too, at times, have felt great hatred for those who have taken too much, with no sorrow for what they do, and have struggled with these feelings many times. The grandfather looked closely at his grandson and continued, "It is as if there are two wolves fighting each other inside of me. One is good and does no harm. He is joy, love, peace, serenity, balance, humility, generosity, compassion, truth, empathy, and faith. He lives in harmony with all around him and does not take offense when no offense is intended. He will only fight when it's right to do so, and then only the right way. The other wolf is anger, evil, envy, greed, arrogance, jealousy, self-pity, resentment, false pride, and ego. He fights everyone. He cannot think because his anger and hate are so great." The old man sighed, concluding, "It is difficult living with these two wolves, for they both try to dominate my spirit." His grandson looked at him intently and then asked, "Grandfather, which of these two wolves wins?" The grandfather replied in a reverent whisper, "The one you feed." The Cherokee.
That is so powerful. Now, Scott, when was the first time that you discovered this story? How old were you?
Oh, Peter. 15.
15?
16.
What was happening in your life when you
Well, I had the great benefit, Peter, of working as a camp counselor at a YMCA camp in Northern Ontario, Camp Wanakita. It was a very wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience for me, and formed a great part of my personality in my life. And I ended up having boys that were difficult in the camp, and we would have campfire almost every night, and these stories would abound. And 150, 175 young fellas with counselors would literally sit around a campfire, and you could hear a pin drop. Captivating.
They illuminate.
Oh, just amazing. We all hear stories in our own voice.
Yes.
Which makes them so much more real than watching a video, a movie, or TV. It's our own mind. It's our own imagination. We all move to it. So it has, I think, much greater meaning. I was 15 or 16 years old when I first heard this story.
And what did it do to you? Can you go back in time, like the first time you hear a story?
It hit me right in the chest. And the reason it did, Peter, was because it made very concrete the process of making hard choices, making moral choices. Somebody asked me a while ago, why don't we have more moral stories in the society today? Morality's hard. It's not easy. It's difficult. It confronts you. You can't run away from it. It's hard. You can't word salad it. You can't politicize it. It's there and it exists. For me at that age, it was a very, very clear model, and it's today, 60 years later, that I still see the same thing. This is how we make decisions. If we feed the right wolf, we will make those decisions. Every decision that we make with the right wolf reinforces the habit, the morality of our decision making. Every decision we make in favor of the bad wolf does exactly the same thing. So we have a choice. And again, you can go back to fundamental theology, philosophy, the Greeks, the Romans, early church, and understand the concept of choice. We always have a choice. And this story so graphically demonstrates its lifelong applicability.
So, Scott, you were born in 1950, and one of the things that you benefited from is you were surrounded by your grandparents' generation who were veterans from the First World War, and then your father's generation, and these are men who were initiated. And one of the things that is missing along with moral stories is initiation into adulthood. One of my favorite writers is Robert Bly, and he wrote Iron John, and it talks about men coming to their own and containing the beast, but at the same time recognizing their inner energy and their power. But it's his other book that sits with me, and it's called The Sibling Society. It says we no longer have adults, we just have siblings. And that's the problem, because we haven't had a society that's been initiated. And I truly believe the only individuals who can tell really great stories have gone through their own hero's journey, which means they've gone through their life and it hasn't been easy. And at some stage in their life, they understand the external is nothing. It's the internal and going within and dealing with your crap and coming out the other side. And that one of the things that I love, I've sat down with a bunch of older men, and some of them are super, super successful externally. And what I found so beautiful is at a certain stage, a healthy male will take off his breastplate and show his scars. And he'll tell you how he got them, and he'll tell you how stupid he was. And they'll show their vulnerability. And for me, the greatest storytellers are ones who actually live life, because you're telling the first story about the two wolves. There was a lot of passion in it because it's related into your life. So, Scott, do you have another story that you have that touches upon something that's missing in society right now?
I do. It's called A Question of Character. It was relayed to us by a psychologist in Virginia, Dr. Barry Hensley, who I had asked to come to the academy to help in staff training. And this is one of the problems, one of the scenarios that he gave to the staff. I like it very, very much. A Question of Character. The first half of the story. You and your friend have shared all 4 years of high school as roommates at a military school in the United States. You hold the 2 top positions in the cadet body. He is the cadet commander, and you are the deputy cadet commander. Both of you have worked hard academically and expect to command the graduating parade and be recognized for your contributions. On the second night, before the closing parade, your roommate confides in you that he cheated on his final math exam to maintain the grade average necessary to secure his appointment to West Point. What do you do? What's the right thing to do? The second half of the story. It's 30 years later. You studied law, you served 2 terms in the United States Senate, and presently serve the President of the United States as his national security advisor. As such, you hold one of the most trusted cabinet positions in the country, and have it because the president made very clear he wanted you for your integrity and honesty, not your politics. Your roommate is now a 4-star general. The president is considering him to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In a private moment, just the two of you, alone in a room, the president wants to know your candid opinion of your old roommate's character, his honesty, his integrity, and how you think he would carry out the very demanding duties of being the chairman. What do you tell the president? What's the right thing to tell? A matter of character.
That's very powerful because it's touching on several different themes. One, your integrity. So your integrity, the response would be, I'm too close to this person to make this suggestion. And I would say that because over that 30-year period, it's also very difficult. And because I've got a good argument for this, Scott. My argument would be people change.
Absolutely.
People change, and something that someone did, he was a young kid, and one of the problems in our society now is people get held to things that they might have believed 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and they change. It's actually the bruises and the scars that make a person. That's one. So my friend wouldn't be happy that I would step aside and I would say, I can't make that decision. I'm too close to this, and that would be the right thing to do, to remove yourself from it. The other question would be, well, that's what I would do. I would also confront my friend, and it's making me think of a story. So I just want to step back. This story makes me think of a really interesting story. It says more about me than this story. I went and I sat down with a gentleman here in San Diego, and while we were meeting, he was a storyteller. He used to write for MASH, and then he became a huge developer and a venture capitalist. In the middle of our meeting, he gets a call. He talks to this guy, and while he's talking to this guy, he gets off and he looks a little shaken, and he tells me the story. He says he had a legal matter, and his lawyer suggested he go to this other lawyer who had worked at his firm, and his lawyer was a senior partner at a very large firm in San Diego. And this individual, this lawyer, said he wasn't going to pick up his pencil unless he got a $5,000 retainer. So after a week of having the work, and he referred to by someone else, he called up this lawyer he was referred to, and the lawyer said, I'm not picking up my pencil until I got my retainer. So he got the money to him, and then now 2 weeks have passed from when this started. And you have to remember there was a senior partner at a firm who recommended he go to this lawyer because they had worked together. Well, the call he just received while we were sitting together was that lawyer he was referred to who wasn't going to pick up his pencil, calling him to say his big fish client, or a client situation prevents him from working on the case, and he can refer him to someone else. So now 2 weeks have passed, and he needed this legal work done. And he's a little frustrated, and he asked me a question, and it was really interesting. You would like this guy. You know how he starts off a conversation? I have a story. That's how he does it. I have a story. So I'm sitting there, and I listen to that story he shares with me, and he says, I might have a few shekels and this and that. Yeah, he does. His wife was almost mayor of San Diego, and he is a columnist for the San Diego Tribune. It's like he's not a little person, but he's a little shaken up because he had work to do, and he was referred to this guy, and it's like maybe there would have been more work. Well, I say to him, well, it wasn't against you, it was against the person who referred you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, because it shows respect for the person who referred him to. So now you have a choice. And the choice is you can go and tell that other lawyer who referred him that this happened so he would know that this person here is showing him respect, because really when someone introduces you or sends you to someone, it's like it's respect to that person. It shows the respect you have if you're getting that referral from someone to that other person. That person's more important than the actual referral.
Sure.
So, but I said that's an option. But then through our course, I said it's an option to tell him or not. You make the decision. We're having a conversation. I find out the reason why his lawyer couldn't work on the case because the situation involved him.
Oh.
Personally. So I then turned to him. I said, now you have no choice, because what this guy did not only harms you, it harms this guy, and he needs to know it. So the story you shared about, West Point and everything, this individual who's making the decision, it really depends on what he's observed of a 4-star general sense. Because I would hate to pigeonhole someone to always be the same person. There's a gentleman that both you and I know who went to the school, and he was very gun-ho, and he was a prick. And he, over the last 16 years, when he bumps into someone who went to the school, he apologizes for being a prick. So would it be terrible? Like, it would say more about me to judge him now than it would about him. And that's just something that I realize. And let's move on with the power of story, because through story, we get to try on different hats. We get to place ourselves in that story. And if it's a good story with a moral, it brings us to a very powerful place. Now, Scott, that being said, so we can learn a lot from story, such as never make an assumption. And we just spoke about that right now, because we don't know someone else's life. And questioning assumptions are key. So, Scott, you have a story that illustrates this point. Can you share with us that story?
Absolutely, Peter. This is a very short vignette, but very powerful. It's called Radio Transmission. It is allegedly a transcript of an actual radio transmission between a United States warship and Canadian authorities off the coast of Newfoundland, released sometime after it happened by the Chief of United States Naval Operations. Canadians, please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision. Americans, recommend you divert your course 15 degrees to the north. Canadians, negative. You will have to divert your course 15 degrees south. Americans, this is the captain of a United States naval ship. I say again, divert your course. Canadians, no, I say again, please divert your course 15 degrees south. Americans, this is the aircraft carrier USS Lincoln. We are the second largest ship in the Atlantic Fleet. Accompanying us are 3 destroyers, 3 cruisers, 3 frigates, and numerous support vessels. I demand that you alter your course 15 degrees north. I say again, that is 15 degrees north, or countermeasures will be undertaken to ensure the safety of this fleet. Canadians, we're a lighthouse. Your call. That is apparently Military Forum 8-2645 APSX. It is
So
actually,
what does that mean?
It means it's an actual transmission. That's the log number.
What is it? What does that story mean to you?
The story means that when we make assumptions, we stand to be so wrong that we can cause harm. We don't listen. We simply direct. We don't have the care in exchange to sit back and absorb another person's not just the words they're saying, but the message they're conveying. And when we do make those assumptions, Peter, they can be very hurtful and they can be very harmful. Not to say anything about being terribly embarrassing.
Well, I'll share with you what I take from that story, and I think this really illustrates everyone's going to take something different from a story. It's going to relate to their story, and they're just going to build on their story. What I take from it is you've got this individual who is a captain of, an aircraft carrier, and he is so attached to I am powerful.
Yeah.
And the fact is, we're all human, and eventually I've seen the most powerful people. I've seen them, they're getting old and they're no longer here, because that is the one equalizer among
Absolutely
all human beings, and not to get attached to some title or some possession, because to me, the lighthouse is going to take him out, and through his arrogance in this story, it's going to take him out a lot sooner than he needed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And that to me is what this story conveys. Is there another story that you'd like to share, Scott? Which one is powerful?
I've got one about teachers, Peter. Would you like to hear one about teachers?
I think we need to show respect to teachers, and I think teachers need to have a backbone as well.
Yep.
I believe right now, with Common Core and all these things that are being put into education, it's not about teaching anymore. It's very much to indoctrination, and it's just as harmful for the teachers as it is for the children.
Absolutely.
I believe both are being abused.
I would agree totally.
So please share with about teachers.
This is called What Good Teachers Make. Okay? And I've added a note afterwards, what makes good teachers? At a dinner party, the host, a high-powered, wealthy CEO, during a lively discussion about education, reminded his dinner guests, those who can do, those who can do, those who can't teach. He declared with authority. To stress his point, he challenged one of his guests. You're a teacher, Bonnie. What do you make? Bonnie thought for a moment, looked at the businessman sitting at the head of the table and asked, you want to know what I make? Is that right? Yes, I do. Teachers don't make what people in the private sector make, and they shouldn't be determined. All right, I'll tell you what I make. Bonnie put her knife and fork on her plate, turned to the host, stating, I make kids work harder than they ever thought they could. I make a C+, feel like the Congressional Medal of Honor. I make kids sit through 40 minutes of class time when their parents can't make them sit for 5 minutes without a screen in front of them. I make kids wonder. I make them question. I make them apologize and mean it. I make them have respect for others and take responsibility for their words and actions. I teach them to write, and then I make them write what they think. I make them read, and then read some more. I make them show all their work in math. I make them use their God-given brain, not a man-made calculator. I make my students from other countries learn everything they need to know in English while letting them observe their unique cultural heritage. I make my classroom a place where all my students feel safe. Finally, I make them understand that if they use the gifts they were given, work hard, and follow their hearts, they can succeed in life. Bonnie paused, thinking carefully, then concluded. Then when people tried to judge me by what I make, with me knowing that money isn't everything, I can hold my head up and pay no attention to them because they are ignorant. Again, Bonnie zeroed in on the host. The table hushed. You want to know what I make? Bonnie declared. I make a difference. Story was written by Taylor Mall.
Now, Scott, that's very interesting that you chose that, because out of all the stories that I've ever heard you share, this one most represents you. From where I'm sitting, I would actually want to share with our audience, there's two men who had a huge influence on my character, and one was my father, who's been dead for many years, and one is you, Scott. You made it a choice early on in your life that instead of becoming a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, you started a not-for-profit for boys with difficulties who you couldn't actually communicate with them normally, because these were rambunctious kids. These were real kids who needed different structures, and now that you're in your 70s and you've had an impact on probably over 4,000 boys. And that to me is like probably the greatest influence that anyone else has had. Someone could have been the president of Ford or Disney or whatever, but they've really never shaped a human being, which you've done. And you once shared a story with me that you read a story and a boy said, I don't agree with it. And then he contacted you like 20 years later and he said, I want to get, what's that story? Because I want to read it to my son. If you can remember that.
Oh, I have that one, Peter. I have that one.
So Scott, if you could share a story that goes with this story, something that touched you about, how stories can touch people generational.
Okay. But I've got to now find it, Peter. Okay, just give me a minute.
Okay, Scott, you shared with me that that stories sometimes take years to have significance for people. It's giving boys and girls choices, what life can be. So what story are you going to read to us now? And is there a story that goes with this story?
Yes, there is, Peter. This is a story called Paid in Full. And I remember reading this to the boys after breakfast. And one boy, and we discussed as was common, and one boy stood up and said, Sir, I disagree with that. I don't think you're right. Wonderful. Tell me why. And he gave a very reasoned argument. And I said, well, fair enough. Fair enough. If that's your opinion, we all respect that opinion. God bless. Good for you. Thank you very much.
And what was the opinion? Do you recall?
Oh, I remember the opinion. Let me read you the story and then I'll tell you.
Okay.
Okay.
Please.
Paid in full. A young man was getting ready to graduate from college. For many months, he admired a beautiful sports car in the dealer's showroom. And knowing his father could afford it, he told his dad that it was the only thing he wanted as a graduation present. Wow. As graduation day approached, the young man awaited signs that his father had purchased the sports car. Finally, on the morning of his graduation, his father called him into his private study. His father told him how proud he was of his accomplishments and how much he loved him. He handed his son a beautiful gift box. Curious and somewhat disappointed, the son opened the box and found a leather-bound Bible with the young man's name inscribed on its cover. Angered, he shouted at his father, "With all your money, you give me a Bible?" Throwing the book down, he stormed out of his father's study. Many years passed, and the young man had become a very, very successful businessman. He had a big home, a family of his own, but realized one day that his father was getting old and that he should go and see him. Before he could make arrangements in his demanding schedule, he received a telegram that his father had died and willed all his possessions to his only son. He needed to come home immediately to settle his father's estate. When he arrived at his father's house, a sudden sadness and regret gripped him, filling his heart. He began to search through his father's important papers and saw the gift box, just as he had left it years ago. With tears, he took the Bible out and opened it. Turning through the pages, he saw that his father had carefully underlined Matthew 7:11. And if ye, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more shall your heavenly Father, which is in heaven, give those who ask him? As the son, full of remorse, read those words, a car key dropped out of the back of the Bible. It had a tag with the dealer's name, the same dealer who had the sports car he wanted. On the tag was his graduation date and the words, paid in full. The discussion with the boys went like this. Well, you know, that's what happens when you only look at the material things. His father was trying to send him a message. What was the message his father was trying to send? I love you. Here's your car, and God bless you. The car is one thing. My affection, our love, our intrinsic relationship is much more important. Enjoy. One boy put up his hand. I acknowledged him. And he said, sir, I disagree. I said, okay, tell me why. Well, the father shouldn't have done that. He should have had Bible in one thing and then given him the car with the other thing. It's perfectly in keeping that that fellow did what he did. I would have done the same thing. Fair enough. Fair enough. How would you have reacted later? He said, I wouldn't have gone. I would have been so disappointed in my father that, you know, I don't think I would have gone. He was quite vehement about his position, Peter. And he argued it, and a couple other boys argued with him. It was a very wonderful exchange. And as usual, I'd gone into the first period time, and the teachers were upset that I was taking some of their class time to tell stories. It was a very, very good exchange. And we kind of left it there. Everybody was fine. 22, 23 years later, he came and visited the school. And it was one of those occasions where he had phoned and asked to come and visit, and he came and visited, and we had a nice exchange. And he said, sir, do you remember that story? And I said, what story was that? He said, you know, the story about the Bible and the car key. Yes, he said, well, do you remember that I stood up and argued that you know, your interpretation of it and everybody else was wrong? I said, I do remember that, and good for you. He said, no, I was wrong. I was wrong. And it's only been the experience of life that showed me that I was wrong. And I'm happy to admit that I was wrong. And I've conveyed that story to my son with the right meaning. And I thought, my God, what a wonderful, wonderful story in itself. And this young man he was full of charity, full of hope, full of goodwill. And life had taught him, life had shown him the wisdom of the man who wrote the story. I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful exchange with that boy. Well, that man, yeah.
Joseph Campbell shared that the reason we have fairy tales, myths, are they're trails for other people how to live, people who've lived before. They've given us little tidbits of like how to have a full life. And what you just shared about this story, and the fact that it gave this boy, now this man, this father, you know, what life could mean, should mean, but it's not something that happens immediately. And that's, I think, the power of a story. If it's a good story, it's going to linger.
Yes. Yes.
And there's no coercion for the person to come to that understanding. If they do mature, and this is the beautiful thing about being human, we're all made out of the same things. We go, like, the big equalizer is we all die and we all get old if we're lucky.
Yep.
You know, so at different stages, different things are going to kick in where we're going to start reflecting. So things that might have not seemed significant become very significant. Yeah. And it actually happens to be now the son in the story is now successful, and he understands that that material car meant nothing, that the Bible meant everything, because the tools for him to have a meaningful life were the Bible, to be able to, and what the father, from just interpreting was what the story means to me, by giving him the Bible, he was giving the tools to actually manifest the car and the life. Absolutely. And actually having a good meaning. You know, it's very frightening, and maybe you have a story like this. Like, I think we've lost the, like, believing in God, and I'm guilty. Before the last 2 years, I was what you would call a materialist, and my religion was materialism. And I could say that my Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Christian friends, well, they weren't any of those. We were all materialists, and our religion was materialism. And that happens to be a big problem right now. John Adams said you can't have the Constitution in the United States without having a moral, religious people. And I think our stories share that. Like, who are great storytellers right now? Rappers talking about murdering people, you know, sleeping with hoes. Like, you know, when you're young, that seems cool, right? Like being a badass. But later on in life, you know, that's not the best thing. I'll give you an example. I remember when I was young, I met this guy who is the father of a friend of mine, and he was an adolescent in his 50s. Now, when you're in your late teens, you think that guy's the coolest guy, the coolest cat.
Yeah.
Looking back, I'm thinking, no, you want Ward Cleaver to be your father. Right. You want someone who has a moral compass, who understands their role. And the problem is, because we don't have role models or moral stories, these people don't even know what a healthy role is.
And Peter, you're absolutely right. You know, we talk about stories and them conveying morals, and is our society, as it sits today, a moral society? Well, what do we need for that? A moral society is made up of moral citizens. How do we get moral citizens? They have to be taught. We have to teach them. Therefore, there have to be teachers. Who teaches these? Adults have the responsibility to teach the young. Why? Because if we do not have guidelines for right behavior, morals, we have no way of living together. And I think there's been situations in both Canada and the United States in the last number of years that have shown that. If we do not have a code of right behavior, there is no conceivable way we can live together in small groups, families, large groups, etc. It simply can't happen. Do the laws take care of that in both our countries? To a certain degree, yes. Are they founded on moral principles? To a certain degree, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we should obey them. Okay.
Only if they're moral laws.
Yes, exactly.
There's a lot of laws. There's a lot of laws right now
that
Let me just share with you a law in the state that I live in, and this might take me off this channel, but the law is that if your child goes to school and they ask them what their pronouns are, and they choose pronouns that are not the pronouns of their chromosome, and you find out 6 months later, they can report you to Children's Aid and say that's abuse. That's an immoral law, because if you can't join the army until you're 18, you can't smoke or vote until you're an adult. How can you make decisions on your sexual orientation? To me, this is an immoral society. It goes back to, it's the end result of when I shared with you Robert Bly's book called Sibling Society. It's like you've got a bunch of children who have not been initiated, do not have the proper stories, or the stories that are being told are not the right stories. The stories that we're told now are being told by immature. Our society used to look at generals, and we would look at politicians. We didn't go to singers or actors.
Well, and if we look at the singers and actors and the rest of it today, and the stories being told, zombies, these films that are meant to terrify people, there's no lesson in these stories. There is no moral in these stories.
Well, I think I would disagree with you, and I'll share with you. I thought about it recently, and maybe you can find a story that represents this. You know, when they talk about when people are put in a corner, flight and fight.
Yeah, definitely.
I think these stories are meant to freeze, to make people freeze.
Now that's interesting. Good for you.
And
that's very interesting.
And I would say 99% of the people freeze, dystopian, overwhelm them, go in and demoralize them. You know, people don't know most of the Hollywood studios are owned by the Chinese, by the CCP, and they're putting these things together, and they're showing true masculinity and solidarity in their media and their propaganda and their stories. However, here they're giving us stories that are confusing, depressing, and when people have to make choices, they say, "Why do it?
Why do it?
What do you have a story about action, taking control?"
I do. You asked me a story about God, and I've been looking for it, and it's called Things God Won't Ask You.
Yes.
God won't ask you about your skin color, but will ask about the content of your character. God won't ask what your job title was, but will ask if you performed your job to the best of your abilities. God won't ask how many promotions you received, but will ask if you promoted others. God won't ask what you did to protect your rights, but will ask what you did to protect others' rights. God won't ask in what neighborhood you lived, but will ask how you treated your neighbors. God won't ask what your top salary was, but will ask if you compromised your character to obtain it. God won't ask about your social status, but will ask what kind of class you displayed. Author unknown.
That's powerful. And again, the message is that when you do something, the greatest rewards are internal. And
Absolutely.
I think the greatest moral that anyone can learn, and it's something like wine that has to mature, is that it has nothing to do with being seen or not being seen. It's you have direction, you have a moral code, and you also have healthy shame and guilt, meaning that when no one else is around, you do what's right.
Yes.
And you're not doing it because you want people to pat you on the head. You come to the conclusion that at the end of the day, because like with all this debauchery that's being portrayed in our society, and I'm going to call it what it is, it's debauchery, because I have a memory and I remember that, that the stuff that's happening right now, like the president of the United States gets a woman to give him in the office, and he gets disbarred, but he's still, people go and like think he's so wonderful, right? It's like, that's moral decay. You know, that was to me personally, that gentleman, President Clinton, his actions were the first overt display
Yes.
of the decay
Of the office of the president. Yeah.
He lied.
Yeah. Yeah. He cheated.
He cheated.
Yeah. He robbed a tradition. He dishonored the office.
Yes.
I agree totally. Peter, you know, I'm a great fan of Teddy Roosevelt. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Do you have his famous man in the arena?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
So is there a person that shows true character who left us with a legacy through his words? Because that's really the power of story, isn't it? How we can live on and share morals long after we're gone. Is there someone who's touched you, Scott?
Oh, very much so, Peter. And a number of people, but Teddy Roosevelt.
Why? Can you give me an example?
Because he was real. He was real. There was nothing phony, nothing pretentious about this man. He right down to his core. And look at his life, Peter. He didn't talk about it. He did it. He didn't have to talk about it. He did it. And he did it with purpose, with alacrity, and wrote some incredible things. One of them is, are you strong enough for the critics? And it's about the man in the arena. Can I read that one to you?
I would love you to share that.
Teddy Roosevelt writes, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who was actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcomings. The man with great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at his best knows in the end the high achievement of triumph. And at worst, if he fails while daring greatly, he knows his place shall never be with the timid and cold souls of critics, who will never know true victory or defeat." Theodore Roosevelt. Awesome.
It's powerful.
Awesome.
And it was an example. And
Yeah.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
We need stories. We need heroes. No, Scott,
Can I read you another quick one, Peter?
please.
Of Roosevelt. This is just a very quick one, but one of my favorites. If you could kick the person in the pants who is most responsible for your troubles, you wouldn't sit down for a week.
I like that one.
Isn't that good?
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Roosevelt was such an authentic character. There was nothing unclear. There was nothing pretentious. There was nothing. He was an authentic man. Very much admire his life and what he wrote.
You know, it's very interesting that all these individuals you've mentioned, they've all gone through an initiation.
Oh, yes.
And that's something that's really missing in our society. And that's the thing that I feel, that these stories can inspire people. For example, the story of the Bible, you know, it's like every generation can go back and say, how do I live this? You know, how can I live this in my own life? That story that you shared of that young man who argued with you, who let it germinate inside them, and they found meaning, and it gave them an idea of what their life could be. And that's what a great moral story does. It gives us that idea. I just want to share a quick story about how a story impacted me, and it had to do with the school in 2000. I went up to the school. There were things happening in my work and in my life, and I had a lot of, you know, down at that point, and I felt at that point that there were certain people who wanted to take me out. I was young, and I didn't realize I was the cause. Like I was the cause of it, you know, and it was my jealousy and everything that I was projecting on everyone else. And that took age to come to that understanding. But at the time, I heard it was a story of Nehemiah.
Yeah.
In the Bible. And it wasn't really a religious story, but it was a story which I think, well, I don't think, I know what it's come to mean to me. And just to share with our viewers about that story, and hopefully I can do justice. There was a gentleman named Nehemiah. He was the king's cupbearer in Persia. And one day these traders come in, and they're from Jerusalem, and he used to, you know, his family had come from Jerusalem, and he hears how this place is just a hole in the wall now. It's disgusting. It's a place you don't want to be. These guys leave, and Nehemiah is really depressed because this is the place he's come from, and it's fallen into becoming like a slum. The king looks at Nehemiah after a few days of Nehemiah being depressed, walking around the palace, and asks, what's wrong, Nehemiah? And he tells him his story, and the king looks at him and says, you've been a loyal subject, a loyal advisor. I'm going to make you the governor of Judea and take whatever you can. Whatever I can do to help because of your loyalty. So Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem. Instead of standing up and telling everyone who he is and pounding his chest, he's there for genuine reasons. So that's a very powerful part of the story. And he sees what can be done and what can't be done. And he sees holes in the wall. And he realizes that's going to be the task, to fix those holes in the wall. So he stands up and he goes and pronounces that he and all of those who will help him will fix the holes in the walls. There are people who are part of Jerusalem who have an invested interest that the walls do not get fixed. There are apathetical people. And there are those who see the value who immediately join. He starts the process, and those who are threatened by it, they first start saying, Nehemiah, you're crazy, you're nuts, you can never do that. And then when the task starts happening, they start trying to sabotage it. And then they try to co-opt it. But Nehemiah ignores them. He just focuses on the task, and those who support him 6 months to the day that he stood up on the wall, the holes are fixed. And the moral of the story is, if you do something authentic, there will always be people who want to attack you. Yeah, but there are always people who will support you. Yeah. And Nehemiah's example was, he focused on those who supported him. And through that, it's credited that action brought the Jews back to Israel and led to the Second Temple and a flourishing of what we know today in the Bible, because if that didn't happen, we wouldn't have the Bible. And to me, that was such a powerful story, Scott, because it said to me, find something worthy and guard those people who support you, because there's lots of people who want to party with you when things are good. You know, when you really know who people are, it's like when things are not so good, and it's those people who show up.
It's a wonderful story, and you tell it beautifully. Oprah Winfrey made an observation once, to quote on your coattail, and she said, everybody wants to ride in a limo with you, but only a few people will take the bus with you.
Powerful, but it's true.
Right on, right on. I got a poem about responsibility.
Yes.
That I'd like to share with you.
Yeah.
Because in part, it's about Nehemiah. Can I share this one with you?
Please.
This is a poem about responsibility. There was an important job to be done, and no reason not to do it. There was absolutely none. But in vital matters such as this, the thing you have to ask is, who exactly will it be to carry out the task? Anybody could have told you that everybody knew that this was something that somebody would surely have to do. Nobody was unwilling, anybody had the ability, but nobody believed it was their responsibility. It seemed to be a job that anyone could have done if anybody thought he was supposed to be the one. But since everybody recognized that anybody could, everybody took for granted that somebody would. But nobody told anybody that we are aware that he would be in charge of seeing it was taken care of. And nobody took it on himself to see it through and do what everybody thought somebody should do. When what everybody needed so did not get done at all, everybody was complaining that somebody dropped the ball. And anybody that then could see it was an awful crying shame, and everybody looked around for somebody to blame. Somebody should have done the job, and everybody should have, but in the end, nobody did what everybody could have. Charles Osgood. I send this poem to my friends in business who complain about their employees and team members and not volunteering for extra hours and not doing this and not doing that, because what it says is, what are you teaching them? What are you leading them? Are you doing those things you ask them to do? And if you're not, why aren't you?
That's interesting that you share that. I know a gentleman who is very much into servant leadership. One of the issues I have with servant leadership is it's not just the leader serving their people, it's also the people knowing what the leader expects. It's got to be mutual, not me just inspiring you, because right now that's become really big, servant leadership. Like, I'm going to inspire someone to be a great painter or whatever, but what's their obligation to the teacher or the person who's involved? Because there is, with mentorship, sponsorship, there's an obligation.
Of course there is.
Unfortunately, it's a me society right now, where immature people, and most people are immature because we live in a society where it's me. And I credit to three people I would actually point out if I was ever to do a PhD that I would love to study, who had this impact on Western society. One would be Dr. Spock, because he came out with this book for baby boomers saying, hey, if the kid cries, just go in and give him whatever he wants, and to spoil them. And every parent out of the 77 million baby boomers in America, they probably had a copy of Dr. Spock. And then I would also, well, to put it into context, he marched with those same kids on the streets saying
Oh, yes.
America is
Yep.
terrible. And then I would also say Pete Seeger, like he's also someone who wrote stories and songs.
Right.
And he was a devout communist, and he had major issues with America, and he ended up singing to these kids subversive songs, and he ended up playing on those campuses exactly like Dr. Spock. And then there's Theodore Gessel. Now he was a propagandist during World War II. He did cartoons of the Nazis, of the Japanese, and he turned his little cartoons into stories. And who was Theodore Gessel? Dr. Seuss. And his stories had huge impacts on millions of people because he understood, and as a propagandist, that he could influence minds. And this is really what's powerful about the stories we read and the stories we listen to and the morals they have, because they will penetrate our subconscious and they will bypass our conscious. And they give us hope, and they also give us fear, and they also give us lessons. Scott, we just spoke about morals and the fact that there's a lack of it and there's a sadness. And is there any story in your book that really captures that, the loss of dignity, self-respect?
I think there is, touches on it, Peter, and perhaps I could share it with you.
Please.
It's called A Remarkable Obituary. Today, we mourn the passing of a beloved old friend, Mr. Common Sense. Mr. Sense had been with us for many years. No one knows how old he was, since his birth records were long ago lost in bureaucratic red tape. We will remember him as having cultivated such value lessons as when to come in out of the rain, why the early bird gets the worm, and that life isn't fair. Common sense lived by simple, sound financial policies, such as don't spend more than you earn, and reliable parenting strategies like adults, not children, are in charge. His health rapidly deteriorated when well-intentioned but overbearing regulations were established. Reports of a 6-year-old boy charged with sexual harassment for kissing a classmate. Teens suspended from school for using mouthwash after lunch. And a teacher fired for reprimanding an unruly pupil. These are just a few that worsened Mr. Sense's condition. Mr. Sense declined even further when school officials required parents' consent to administer aspirin to a student, but could not inform them when a girl became pregnant and wanted an abortion. Finally, Common Sense lost his will to live when the 10 Commandments became contraband, churches became businesses, and criminals received better treatment than their victims. Mr. Sense gave up the ghost when a woman failed to realize that a steaming cup of coffee was hot. She spilled a bit on her lap and was awarded a substantial monetary settlement by the courts. Common Sense is preceded in death by his parents, trust and truth, his wife, discretion, his daughter, responsibility, and his son, reason. Not many attended Common Sense's funeral because so few realized he was actually gone. Laurie Bergman is the author.
That's powerful.
Isn't that wonderful?
Something? And that really is common sense. There's just so much craziness right now. And, anybody who has a memory knows that there's lunatics have taken over the asylum.
Yes. Yeah.
And however, it can be put right. And I believe through stories, it can, that they're through great destruction, knew, like, wasn't, I remember reading about the English court was complete debauchery and everything, and then Queen Victoria came and it swayed the other way. You know, like it goes left, and you know, it moves. And I think there's enough people out there that if they choose to build their inner strength, society, I believe, can build its moral strength externally again.
I believe you're right. I believe there's still people out there who hold it in bastions and small groups. I honestly believe that, Peter. I honestly believe that the madness that seems to occupy our political precincts, our some of our business precincts that just boggle my mind. Just yes. I boggle my mind, Pete. They can be combated. How are they combated? They're combated with stalwartness. They're combated through the process of, again, enlightening imagination. And you're right, that never happens without initiation. Initiation is a key factor. And if you look at many of these people who spout these lies and nonsense, none of them have ever been initiated in anything. They're spoiled brats.
I agree.
They behave like spoiled brats. And the rhetoric is dangerous because many folks, again, who've not necessarily been initiated, will buy the most dramatic presentation. And they're filled with drama, but it's bad drama. It's very difficult. The essence of the stories bring us a single message. We are all human. We are all vulnerable. We are all potentially both good and evil. You have not the right to choose. You have the responsibility to choose. That's what these are. And they can be conveyed that way to our children, to our friends, our employees, our fellow workers. That's why I put them in the book.
Scott, can you hold up the book right now?
Oh, okay. Does that show it, Peter?
Yes.
Yeah, there you are. Sorry, I'm not good at this.
It's a beautiful cover.
Didn't they do a great job?
They did a fantastic job.
Yeah. Richie Publishing.
And I love the fact that the cup is like a sun. It's very bright. So Scott, Motivational Morning Stories. You're able to get it on Amazon. And what is your hope?
My biggest hope is that people will find it resonates with something deep inside them that wants recognition to do good and to be a moral person. And secondly, to take that feeling and through the stories, share it with their loved ones.
Beautiful. Is there one last story you can leave us with to have us ponder and see the beauty that is in your book, the wisdom that you've spent over 40 years gathering and sharing with us?
I will share with you the story Red Marbles, which I will put right up front. I choke up every time I read. So be patient, if you will, for a moment. During the waning years of the Great Depression before World War II, I was in a small southeastern Idaho town. I used to stop by Miller's grocery store for farm fresh produce as the season made it available. Food and money were still extremely scarce, and bartering was often the currency of exchange. One day, Mr. Miller was bagging some potatoes for me. I noticed a small boy, delicate of bone and feature, raggedly dressed, but clean, hungrily appraising a basket of freshly picked green peas. I couldn't help overhearing the conversation between Mr. Miller and this young boy. "Good morning, Barry. How are you today?" "Oh, Mr. Miller, fine, thank you. Them peas sure look good." "They are good, Barry. How's your ma?" Fine. Getting stronger all the time. Good to hear. Is there anything I can help you with? No, sir, just admiring them peas. Would you like to take some home? Mr. Miller asked. Sure would, but I got nothing to pay for them with. Well, have you got anything to trade me? Something for the peas. All I got is my prize marble here. Is that right? Let me have a look at it, Mr. Miller said. The young boy dug deep in his pocket. Here 'tis. She's a dandy. Barry handed it to Mr. Miller to examine. I can see that, Mr. Miller replied. Holding the marble up to the light, examining it very closely. Only thing is, Barry, this marble is blue and I kind of fancy a red one. Do you have a red one like this at home? Not exactly, but almost, Barry replied. Tell you what, take this sack of peas home, and next trip this way, let me look at that red marble, Mr. Miller told the boy. Sure will. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mrs. Miller, who had been standing nearby and witnessed this exchange as well, came over to help me. With a smile, she confided, there are 2 other boys in our community. All 3 are from impoverished circumstances. Jim just loves to bargain with them for peas, apples, tomatoes, whatever's in season, she explained. When they come back with their red marbles, and they always do, Jim decides that really a red marble isn't what he really wants, and sends him home with a sack of produce for a green one, or an orange one, or another color. I left the store smiling to myself, impressed with this man and his wife. A short time later, I moved to Colorado, where I never forgot the story of Mr. Miller and the boys bartering for marbles. Years went by, each one more rapidly than the last, until I visited an old friend in that Idaho town. While I was there, Mr. Miller passed away, and my friends and I attended the visitation. Upon arriving at the mortuary, we got in line to meet Mrs. Miller and offer what comfort we could. Ahead of us in line, this is where I choke up, were 3 young men. One was in an army uniform, the other 2 in tailored suits with crisp white shirts and fashionable ties. All 3 were very professional looking. They approached Mrs. Miller standing together, composed, smiling by her husband's casket. Each of the young men hugged her, kissed her cheek, spoke briefly with her, and moved on. Her misty blue eyes followed them as each man, one by one, placed his warm hand over the cold, pale hand in the coffin. Each of them quietly left the mortuary, emotionally wiping their eyes as they went. Our turn came to greet Mrs. Miller. I reminded her of the story so many years ago of her husband bartering for marbles. With her eyes glistening, she took my hand and guided me to the casket, explaining, those 3 young men who were just here were the boys I told you about. Barry, the boy you saw, was the one in uniform. They just told me how much they appreciated the things Jim traded with them. Now, at last, they told me Jim couldn't change his mind about another color or size of marble he wanted when they came to pay their debt. We've never had a great deal of wealth in this world, she confided, but right now, my Jim would consider himself the richest man in Idaho. With loving gentleness, Mrs. Miller lifted the lifeless fingers of her dead husband. Resting underneath were 3 exquisitely polished red marbles.
Well, that's really what life is what you give. And Scott, I want to thank you for the last.
Well, I apologize for my emotions, Peter, but yeah.
There's no reason, because it just shares that you gave a part of yourself. This is not a book that you just put together overnight. And I'm going to suggest to everyone listening that it's well worth having to be able to pick up for a pick-me-up or for a compass. And I'm going to suggest that you go to Amazon and you get a copy of Motivational Morning Stories by Scott Bowman. Scott, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me and sharing these stories, because these are powerful stories, and many people listen to podcasts. However, they don't have a string tying it together, and these stories are powerful, and we need to go back to our old stories to put together a new story that is going to bring our society to the next stage, which desperately we need a healthy stage.
A pleasure, Peter. Blessings to you and your family.
Thank you.
There probably isn't a parent who hasn't at one time or another wished that their children could be knocked into shape by a drill sergeant. A few weeks in the Army, you may have said, that would teach those kids a thing or two. Well, there's one school which operates on exactly that philosophy. It's in Southern Ontario and is Canada's only private military school. Now, in its 4th year of operation, it was founded to help boys who couldn't seem to learn in the large classes and academic freedom of most schools today. This year, 75 boys have signed up to salute, work, and march their way into manhood.
Father, we ask for your guidance today and the next 2 days on our mission, and we hope we will be worthy. Amen.
Right turn! 1, 2, 1. By the left, right wheel, quick march!
It's 6 a.m., just a few miles from Niagara Falls. Somewhere nearby, youngsters are rolling over in bed, indulging themselves in an extra hour of sleep before school.
All right, only 49 miles, 1,500 meters.
But here, at the Robert Land Academy, Canada's only private military school, it's 0600 hours, and the day has already begun. They had told me that this was one tough school, and that this was the sort of day that exemplifies just what it's all about.
The Robert Land Academy encourages 5 qualities: loyalty, honor, courage, commitment, and labor. And this first big test of the school year pretty clearly falls into the labor category. A 3-day, 54-mile march across the Niagara Peninsula with full pack.
The boys of Robert Land, who range from 10 to 17 years of age, have been marching to a special beat since 1978.
We are in the middle of Operation Inspiration Battle.
That was when Scott Bowman, then himself only 26 years old, saw the need for a school which provided a combination of strict discipline, a fundamental curriculum, and a strong emphasis on moral values that couldn't be found elsewhere.
What are they getting here now? This
surfing.
fellow on the other side of you, what is he getting, set of blisters perhaps, out of this that he wouldn't be getting if he were in a public school back in Toronto or Vancouver?
We're in the process here of giving these young fellows the beginnings of a very solid base of discipline, of confidence in themselves.
And he would not get that in the public school system?
In our opinion, no.
Bowman's confidence in his boys is borne out. 3 days later, they return to the school, having completed something that many of them would have thought impossible just one short month before.
Gentlemen, very well done. 50-odd miles, 3 days. They said it couldn't be done. We did it. Well done. Who are we?
Yes! Attention! We're the Jets from Robert Land! Free Willie, Beachley, Jolly, Robert Land! Raw, raw, eat 'em raw! Feels good.
The principle here is that the lessons learned on the march can be transferred to the classroom. Whether those 54 miles will save any souls academically remains to be seen. That they've been hard on the souls is beyond dispute.
The Robert Land Academy is not your average school. There are no t-shirts and blue jeans here, no noon-hour cigarettes in the parking lot, no cutting class. But even at a time when many educators favor a return to fundamentals, getting back to basics and discipline, there are many who might take exception to the spit and polish image and the hard rock routine of Robert Land.
Yes, sir! Todd Sanical! Todd Sanical, why are you different than everybody else? Where's your gabardine?
On one side of the argument is the view that too much regimentation is a bad thing, that what is needed, especially in this era of automation, is less conformity and more individualism. On the other side would be Scott Bowman's ancestor, Colonel Robert Land, the United Empire loyalist for whom the school is named.
How's the schedule for the Christmas exams looking? Very well. Yeah, very well.
Bowman has based his school on the strict 18th century values, which he says were so dear to the old man.
All right, if the arguments are that there's too little flexibility, that there's too little room for individualism and self-expression, that there's too much conformity, what do you say? How do you answer?
Let's take them one at a time. First of all, in terms of individualism, I think that criticism is made because of this. We all wear the same uniform. Many other private schools have a uniform. The boys all wear the same. This is no different. Individuality, yes, we are in definite favor of it. Yes, it has to be. Yes, it is a must for a man to develop. But clearly, in adolescence, that's the time to learn it.
Gentlemen, this is Robert Land's tunic that he wore in the War of 1812.
In battle?
In battle.
That's the original. Yes,
This is his battle tunic.
Oh, look at the doohickeys
Look
on
at
his
the gold.
shoulder.
Look at the gold on his shoulder.
That's excellent.
Learning hasn't always come easily to many of the boys at Robert Land. According to Bowman, who also teaches history at the school, most of his 75 students were lost in the sprawling and impersonal public school system. Here, for $8,000 a year, they get intimate classes, a core curriculum more oriented to science and social studies than the arts and culture, and tight around-the-clock supervision.
You're talking to someone, me, who is a product of education in the 1960s when things were increasingly open, more and more flexible. Everything was oriented towards an individual student. How would you expect me to look upon your school?
You have to look at the boys. Look at their faces. You watched them running today. You watched them on the march. You've watched them in the dining hall. You'll see them on parade tomorrow. Those will tell you.
What you sometimes do see in the boys of Robert Land is fear, particularly on their first try at scaling the 3-story rappel tower, 30 feet from wind-blown top to bottom.
Okay, a little bounce. A little more. A little more. Okay, back in position. Okay,
in theory, this exercise develops a standard mountaineering technique. In practice, it's used to build the Robert Land brand of courage.
Watch the way he ties us on, please. I feel like surviving the evening. Number 1 on rappel!
Lower yourself back, legs straight. Legs straight. Lower yourself back. Hold the chin. A little more, so go. And go. A little more. A little bit more. Okay, take a step down more. Take a step. Knees got you. Plant your feet. Okay, relax. Stop there. Okay, hold yourself there. Look over your shoulder where you're going. Where you go. Okay, just walk down the wall. Okay. Now, a little bounce. Oh, good.
Whether it's the courage needed to step off the rappel tower for the first time, or the labor and commitment demanded by a 54-mile hike, there's an almost constant emphasis on values at the Robert Land Academy.
8, 9.
But the burden of that moral instruction doesn't trouble the school's director of studies, Ed Godden.
Is there not a problem when you aspire to teach values? It is a very subjective thing. It depends very much whose concept of loyalty, whose concept of honor, whose concept of courage you're talking about.
Yes. I would agree with you. That's a subjective
Arbitrarily,
thing.
then, how do you decide what loyalty is, or what sense of courage you should give to these kids?
Well, a lot of it, I think, at this school, because of our size and the intimacy, in a sense, it's worked out together. in any kind of responsible situation like a family or a school.
Who's coming?
The way it happens at Robert Land is with precision. From rise and shine, through classes and extracurricular activities to lights out, these boys, some as young as 11 years old, are expected to perform to military standards. Be where you're told to be on time, don't talk back, always say, sir.
Attention! Okay. Nice. Okay. Ready?
But if, in a place like this, the choices are made for you, by definition, is it not going to be more difficult to make those choices on your own when you're out in the real world?
Only if the system were so prohibitive in terms of letting you make choices that it never let you graduate to the state where you could make your own choices. What our system says to the boys is a much healthier kind of a message, that you will graduate from this system, you will leave this nest, and you will no longer need its supports because you will be able, yourself, as a competent, capable person, to go out into the world and make your own decisions and live by them.
At Robert Land, the rules are spelled out in a discipline code. Punishment is unashamedly physical. For minor offenses, talking in class or not doing homework, there are laps around the parade square or work details.
Start over. Pick it up, pay your debt, let's go.
The most notorious form of discipline is the dreaded number 14, so called because it's the 14th item on the list, and because it involves 14 laps around the soccer field, carrying a pack which weighs up to 35 pounds.
You're talking here about fear of having to run around that soccer field with a full pack on, keeping somebody from repeating the offense. Is that right?
When limits are given, when the structure is very clear, when boys choose to challenge the structure in a negative way, yes, very clearly the consequences are laid out beforehand.
Just looking at one of the items in your disciplinary code, you can get laps around the soccer field, full pack, for insubordination, serious crime, or cowardice. And in brackets after cowardice, it says, especially running away.
Mm-hmm.
Do boys run away?
Yes.
How do you deal with it?
We deal with that in two ways. Depends on the age of the boy, depends on the situation, depends on how and where he went.
Do you treat it as cowardice?
It is treated, again, individually with each boy.
Here it says cowardice, especially running away.
Yeah.
The two are linked. Is running away cowardice as far as...
In many ways it is, yes it is.
We're talking here about 10 or 11-year-old boys, many of them away from home for the first time, running away. Is that not a natural reaction to this sort of circumstance?
It is a form of cowardice in the sense that it is not a courageous act. It is the form of allowing the immature part of your personality to rule you.
I sent here because I didn't want to work at school. My education was low. I was put in special ed for 2 or 3 years, and they told me I wasn't smart enough to go into an ordinary class.
Here at Robert Land, the stories seldom vary. These kids were the discipline problems, the slow learners, the children whose parents and teachers simply couldn't deal with them.
Is that a similar story with the rest of you guys? You just,
for one reason or other, you can't make it someplace else.
Lazy. That's all it is. It took me 3 years to adjust. And to say to myself, wake up, you know, you're at Robert Land and you're going to try it. And I've been trying, and I think I'm going to make it.
Everybody knows that nothing is ideal. What's the bad side here? What don't you like about Robert Land?
Punishment. Punishment. Discipline.
You just told me that discipline was the good part of it.
It is. It is.
No,
But
well, discipline's good. It's receiving it that isn't so good.
Yeah, receiving it.
You mean in the long run it's good, in the short term it's not so great.
Right,
like
because
14s.
like I've done a rock pile, and that's when you go on a pile with a concrete, a slash hammer, and you smash concrete all day, and you get bread and water.
What had you done?
Well, I made a wrong comment
To whom?
to a young lady, and I was punished for it.
And I got a...
And I think that was fair.
You know, there are people out there,
14.
when they hear about you running around the soccer field with a pack, when they hear about you working on the rock pile because you've done something
I think
wrong,
it's a horrible place.
they'll say,
It's not.
exactly, this is not a place for kids.
That's the
No,
problem, I
it-
think.
But that's the
it
problem.
is,
It
it
is.
is. That's the problem. Parents are too soft. They don't know how much we can do, and we can do a lot.
Attention!
I wish you all a very happy and safe Thanksgiving. Be sure to remind your parents of all the things that you have learned. I'm sure they're anxiously awaiting you. Have a good, safe weekend, and I'll look forward to seeing you all at 2000 hours sharp Monday night.
Academy, far to left, left wheel, quick, march!
After just 3 years of operation, it's too early to tell if the Robert Land Academy can instill lasting values and self-discipline, whether it will turn out graduates ready to face adulthood in a difficult world, or young men better equipped to follow than to lead.
And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And I find this all the time. I sit down with business owners all the time, and they always give me unsolicited advice because they want to share their knowledge, and it's really important.
Here with me is Peter Merrick,
president of MerrickWealth.com.
Peter is an income and capital enhancement consultant,
speaker and author.
He is also a
recognized expert in the world of succession planning.
There's over 800 published articles and 3 industry textbooks.
He's a Canadian who joins us today from San Diego, California. Thanks for joining us.
So, Peter Merrick, tell us about you.
Well, I've been in the financial service industry since the end of 1991.
I graduated during the recession. The baby boomers were in their positions, so there was no jobs. So the two businesses that opened up were the technology field and the financial field. It was the Wild West in both of them. So I had this brilliant idea, and I had a friend of mine, and we started talking, and I said, hey, how difficult would it be for us to get a mutual fund dealer license? Not difficult enough. Thank God for those 10 years, the market just went up. I would sit down and I would take somebody's entire life savings that they spent 15, 20 years accumulating it, this young kid who knew nothing about nothing, and I would go and just invest it, and luckily it went up because the markets were crazy in the 90s. It was a boom time.
But in 2004, my life blew up.
I almost went bankrupt, but I was very fortunate because there were very few CFPs at the time, but every university in Canada wanted to offer the CFP program, so I got recruited as a prof. And it was great. I was reading all the textbooks. I would call all the big publishers. And what I came to the conclusion was the succession planning was missing.
One of the issues is there was very little talking beyond the accumulation stage. Like, how do you have a healthy life after you've done that?
I also looked at demographics. At the turn of the 20th century, the average life expectancy in the West and North America was 43 years old. And people are dying at 83. No one ever lived to 83.
Well, so I always say that there's two financial plans. There's the financial one that we work on, and there's what you get to do with all your time and that energy once you're done. And with this thing that they've been racing towards, they've hit it. But if they haven't thought about what they're going to do after or how they're going to feel validation for their existence, they just never stop. They just keep going.
Well, it's not anybody's fault because when people are young, they focus too much on doing. And later on in life, they have to focus on being.
So I wrote my own textbooks because
I thought it was very important to talk about how do you transition from the first half of life, which Carl Jung called it the mourning, where you're accumulating, whether it's your ego, designations, education, houses.
The second half is deconstruction, giving wisdom away, giving away my money, giving away my time, leaving a legacy.
So talk to me about that stage. What's the purposeful way or kind of the best practices, ways, or considerations for people to take when transitioning into that stage of life?
Well, one, decide whether or not you want an exit. I find between the ages of 55 and 70, a lot of people feel that I'm just tired doing the same thing that I've always done, and I have the money now. So maybe I should get out when the going is good and pass on my business to someone who's got the energy to navigate it. Number two, who Who are you going to sell your business to? There's one issue about selling it to a family member or an employee. What happens after you sell it? Things don't go right. A lot of business owners want to sell their business because they just want to wash their hands. But by selling it to someone you know, you're not getting out of your business. The best is to sell to a third-party purchaser. The last one is after they make that transition from being a business owner, building a nest egg for themselves to have choice, they don't know what they're going to do. I've spoken to people who say, you know, I'm going to take up golf. So my question is, do you golf now? I don't golf now. So what makes you think you're going to golf later? I just want to share with you guys a story.
There was a gentleman, his name was Bob Hunter. He was quite a celebrity. He started Greenpeace during the height of my blow up. When I was going through business loss, he was bringing me on national television. And you know what he was doing? He was saying, so Peter, don't you do that? And then he would give my phone number and he would give my web address. The reason why it went by merrickwealth.com, because it was almost like a phone number that would run across the television and I could actually see myself making money off of it. And he was dying. He had prostate cancer. And he turned to me and said, Peter, one day you will be in a position that you'll help someone else. And let me share with you about the legacy. Bob's been dead for 16 years. And I'm sharing you the legacy of Bob Hunter because he made a difference for me. And if I make a difference in anyone else's life, I'm a product of those people who are willing to do things and they had no expectations. And a true mentor is someone who has no expectations that they're going to see the tree blossom.
The reason I wrote The King of Main Street is younger people don't know how to find the right mentors, and older people have this need to mentor. It's almost like a biological need because they can see beyond their physical existence. They know that the sun was here before them and it will be after them, and what's going to be left behind that they leave.
I would joke, I can't make you money, but I can definitely save you money. What I mean by that is I am a Sherpa. That's someone who would guide someone, help them come down. But I realize the most precious asset they have is not their money. It's their time.
What last piece of advice would you like to give our listeners?
If you have a business, the most important thing to ask yourself is, why did you get into the business? And it's usually not to create a legacy, it's to create the lifestyle that you want. And at that point, ask yourself, what do you want to do during your last days?
The last human freedom is to choose one's own beliefs, one's own way. Everything else you can have taken away from you. But what you believe and how you choose to act in the world, that is yours. And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And that is going to give you fulfillment emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. You guys have been wonderful, and I want to thank you, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.